Hello everyone, CDNet here with another update from the Avalanche ecosystem. It's been a little while since we've last seen each other, if you will. To be honest, I've just been pretty tired. I've been waking up tired, going to bed tired, even taking a week off from human work, if you will. Didn't really help that much, so that's a bit of a struggle. Of course, at the same time, the Avalanche ecosystem exploded to $0.01 trillion, so still early, but it is up quite a bit from where we started a couple weeks ago. With that, of course, also comes a lot more exposure to the Avalanche ecosystem for a lot of people, a lot of projects joining. As someone, who's a little bit visible within the Avalanche ecosystem, I'm getting a lot of DMs, which I feel I have to, at very least, respond to. A policy, of course, is still no promotions or exposure. So when I started this channel, I basically did a video on every new development within the Avalanche ecosystem. Then, of course, when it became a little bit busier, the daily news stuff I kind of gave over to like Avexholic, for example. And then in August, it got so busy that I had to go to like roundups in order to keep up. And then now it's even kind of a little bit too busy for that. The last time I did prepare for a roundup, which you never got to see, I basically had about 50 projects lined up that I wanted to talk about. But as I was going through them, I was like, well, most of them weren't super innovative. They were a little bit cookie cutter, in all honesty. And I prefer to focus on stuff that's like really interesting. So I have been doing that. In the background, I've got a lot of stuff going on, some really cool stuff as well, some of which I'm sure you will see on this channel, maybe a little bit more on Twitter, whenever that's ready to share. In the meantime, I was happy to see that I was missed a little bit, people asking when the next video would come. So very happy to do a video right now and share with you a little bit about lending, borrowing and leverage on the Avalanche ecosystem, which of course was the main driver for a lot of the TVL growth we saw recently. With that said, of course, nothing in this video is financial advice. I'm also not going to go very in-depth on anything, just going to give you a very quick overview on some of the options that you have. So let's start out with the very straightforward lending and borrowing protocols. Aave is the one that, when it was announced, it really spurred the Avalanche rush. It really started it. Together with Banky and Curve, of course, in the same announcement. The way Aave works is very straightforward. Basically, you deposit a certain asset as collateral, and then you can borrow against that asset. Because of Avalanche Rush at the moment, you also gain some interest when you borrow funds. So actually you make a profit on borrowing. So one common strategy for people to do is borrow a certain asset, then deposit that asset as collateral again and borrow against it. This way, this strategy is either called looping or folding. And basically it means that the collateral you put in, you can farm the same rewards with it multiple times. So it's a fairly low risk, medium yield strategy, I would say. And that strategy applies to Aave. It also applies to Banky, which since today I think has also enabled the use of USDT as collateral. And the same applies to Trader Joe, which also has Link, for example, which you can use as collateral. The good thing is if you're looping or folding based on the same token, so you're not mixing and matching, your chance of liquidation is basically zero because you're borrowing against the same asset that you're supplying. So if the price goes up or down, it doesn't really affect the collateral ratio or your risk very much. Now, if you're a bit lazy like me, you do not have to execute these strategies yourself. You can just deposit into both Snowball and YieldJack in order to have them do the folding. If you're depositing on Snowball, you can earn a little bit of Snowball tokens on top. Or if you're using YieldJack for the Joe farm specifically, they are also qualified for Yak Rush, so you can earn some MYAC incentives here as well. A little bit in the same vein is V-Finance, V2 specifically, because V-Finance suffered an exploit quite soon after their launch, which I think has hurt it a little bit. But to my understanding, it works essentially the same. You can supply and borrow assets. The APR is still really good, and they've done another audit recently, plus they're having a plan to repay back people who suffered in the exploit. So if you can look past the exploit, this is definitely an option for you as well. Then a different style of lending protocol, if you will, is apps like TeddyCash, XDollar, or Orca DAO. Basically in all of these situations, we've briefly talked about all of them before, I think. You supply a collateral to open a trough, a vault, whatever you want to call it. And basically that will be used as collateral against which you can mint their stablecoin. Their stablecoin should float around the $1 mark as well. And you can then trade it for another token or do whatever you want with it. Abracadabra money is very similar to that as well. It works better on Ethereum at the moment. I do hope we get a full version of this on Avalanche. But at least the minting of Magic Internet money does work. And it's essentially the same again. However, compared to the other three I just showed you, I think normally Abracadabra money just focuses a little bit more on yield-bearing assets. So as you can see, currently on Avalanche, you can borrow AVAX and wrapped memories, which you can get from Wonderland. It's basically stake time. They are yield-bearing assets. They kind of grow. You can borrow against them, and then you have the Magic Internet Money stablecoin as well. Now, the real question, of course, is what are you going to do with the money you borrow? Of course, folding is a very legitimate strategy. I'm doing it myself as well. But you could also do something a little bit more risky, such as, for example, staking AVAX, buying US dollar and buying a different asset with it. If you think that asset will go up, you can then sell like half the assets back into dollars and make profit that way without ever having to sell your AVAX. One app that already kind of does this in one single go is, of course, Margin Swap, which you've also talked about a couple months ago. So, some things have changed, but I think in the base it's the same. You supply certain assets, you can then borrow against that asset to do a margin trade. Basically what I just explained, you just borrow some funds to, purchase a couple more tokens, play around with those tokens, and once you're ready, you return them. Similarly, you can do leverage yield farming. So if your return on your farm is higher than the interest you have to pay on whatever you borrow, which of course now that borrowing is profitable doesn't fully apply anyway, but you can also just, borrow funds and put those into a normal pool. If a pool has, 159% APR, you're probably going to make a profit. So that is definitely an option as well. The more risk-averse user could just borrow stablecoins and deposit them into a stable vault like Curves, or again like Snowball Finance's S4D. Now, of course, we cannot talk about borrowing or leverage without talking about liquidation risk. Generally, the more complex a financial product or strategy gets, you may be exposed to a lot more risk. In the case of borrowing, it doesn't have to be very bad, especially since in decentralized finance, you get to keep the tokens you borrowed if you get liquidated. So let's say you're giving AVAX as a collateral and minting Magic Internet Money. If you get liquidated, you still get to keep your Magic Internet Money. So you can, I think, borrow at like 85% or 90%, something like that, collateral ratio. So yes, you make a loss of 10-15%, but it's not 100% like it would be if you trade leverage on a centralized exchange like Binance sometimes. Of course, fully dependent on your strategy. So, study up yourself and take a risk level that's acceptable to you. Again, nothing here is financial advice. So please be aware that it can be risky, but there's also very good opportunity. With that said, that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in the next video, whenever that is, and goodbye.